Hello, everyone. Welcome to the important conversation that we are going to have today about understanding bias when financing your venture. We're going to go ahead and get started now. But before we do so, I do want to start just by recognizing that this topic, while important to discuss, may be uncomfortable for some. So if you are comfortable, we welcome you to turn on your video during the session. But if at any point you wish to take yourself off video, please feel free to do so. We also want to recognize that this is not a new topic. The impacts of bias and racism discrimination in fundraising have been apparent for a really long time. While recent events have shined a light on the systemic biases in the industry, there is still much that must be done before we see real change. In an ideal world, this session wouldn't even be needed. But in light of where things are today, we just want to prepare founders for these tough conversations and existing realities. So in our conversation today, we will only begin to touch on how bias and racism manifest in the fundraising process, but it's our hope that this will serve as a catalyst to inspire future conversations around the topic among founders, community members, and leaders. To kick us off today for the beginning of the portion of the event, we are thrilled to be joined by Shekinah Williams, the Director of Global Initiatives at Babson College's CWEL, and Laura Hung, the Associate Professor at Harvard Business School and the author of Edge, Turning Adversity into Advantage, which the first 50 registrants for this session will actually receive a free copy of that book, courtesy of JP Morgan. Those 50 registrants will receive an email from me after the session with a link to redeem your free book. So Shekinah and Laura will spend the first 10 to 15 minutes sharing with you some of their research-backed evidence on how bias and racism manifest across the industry. And afterwards, we'll open the floor for some Q&A with Shekinah and Laura before moving on to our founder panel moderated by Alton McDowell, the co-head technology and disruptive commerce at JP Morgan Commercial Banking. And with that, Shekinah, I will stop sharing my screen and let you begin and present.
All right, thank you, Addison. So, you can see my screen okay? All right, so thank you for the introduction. So what I'm gonna do to start off the conversation is to really give you some data that kind of really lays the foundation, talking about women-owned businesses and then breaking it down to women of color small businesses. So as Madison says, I am the Director of Global Initiatives for the Center for Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership at Babson College. At the end of my presentation, I'll talk all about the great work that we're doing at the center. But for this presentation, what I want to do is kind of do a step back and just give you kind of the landscape of what the numbers are saying. So women-owned businesses, we represent 13 million small businesses in the US. Half of those women-owned businesses are represented by women of color-owned businesses. Year after year, in the past 5 years, we've seen a tremendous uptake as far as the growth of women-owned businesses, particularly women of color-owned businesses have outgrown non-minority groups by 10%. But when we dig down deeper in the numbers, what's alarming is that when we look at even the growth is growing, the number of businesses, we are not creating scalable and backable businesses. So when we look at the average revenue for women of color small businesses and comparing that to non-minority groups, there's a huge, tremendous gap. So we're talking about the average woman of color owned business is $65,000 compared to non-minority groups, which is $218,000. And I'm gonna talk about the why next. So just showing you like a little snapshot of how year after year, the gap is getting wider. So what is the why behind that? So we're here today to talk about the biases in the world. So we can talk hours and hours about the wage gap between non-minority groups and minority groups. We can also talk about the lack of representation when we talk about banking, VCs, or even people in the C-suite. We can talk about networking challenges, having that network to support our small business, and also the lack of mentorship. But one of the key things we always hear about is also the lack of access to capital and funding. So these are the kind of the big whys. And when we narrow that down, we look at VC funds that are given to women-owned businesses is less than 3%. And out of that 3%, only 0.2% of VC funding go to women of color businesses. So you might ask, what is Babson College, #1 business school? What are we doing to help solve those problems when we talk about women-owned businesses and also minority-owned businesses? So for the last 20 years, the Center for Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership has led the way as far as preparing women for the world and preparing the world for women. We have some very unique programs specifically designed to address the challenges that women and also women of color go through with starting, growing, and sustaining their business. So one of the programs that we run, and due to COVID, we went totally online for this academic year. It's a 12-week program, is our online accelerator program, which is for 12 weeks. And we help female founders now throughout the world, help them start and scale their business. So we really dig deep on the issues that we deal with individually and also on our business. The second program that we have underneath the Center for Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership is the Diana International Research Institute. What we do, that's our research arm. So what we need to do, not only trying to move the needle around funding and also access to entrepreneurial leadership, is also to build a community talking about changing policies, working with researchers, practitioners, and also educators when we talk about women entrepreneurial leadership is very key. Another vertical that we are going full force on for this academic year, I'm just proud to announce our Be Well program, which is the Black Women's Entrepreneurial Leadership Program, which is going to be a 12-week program that we're going to address the unique challenges that Black women face with start and growing their business. We want to be that resource partner that helps eradicate the cycle that Black women go through when they're trying to start and grow their business. So with that said, just a little bit more about Be Well, if you want to take a quick screenshot about that. The Be Well program will again be a 12-week program, totally online. Participants will receive one-on-one coaching. We're developing a network of experts that will work with these individuals beyond the 12 weeks. But during the program, they'll have access to all our resources, our Babson pedagogy. Applications are now open, and we're accepting applications to October 4th. And that's our information here, and this is my contact information. But as we continue on the conversations today to talk about the biases, I just wanted to lay the kind of the landscape of what the numbers look like as far as women entrepreneurial leadership, and also when we talk about the women of color group as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Shekinah. I will pass it off to Laura, and Laura, you can go ahead and share your screen, and then afterwards we'll open it up for some Q&A.
Okay, so first off, thank you, Shekinah. I mean, wow, look at some of those numbers. So, I mean, those are numbers that are really astounding and depressing. And, you know, so I think it's so important for us as I share my screen to sort of think about some of those numbers. Can everyone see my slides and still hear me? Everything good? Okay, great. So yeah, Shekinah was sort of mentioning, right, there are huge disparities in the entrepreneurship ecosystem based on funding, based on resources. And what I've been studying in my research for the last decade or so is really these inequalities, these disparities, people who are underestimated. And we have so many disparities that we see out there based on gender, race, ethnicity, class, religion, sexual orientation, age, and the list sort of goes on and on and on. And so what I want to talk just a couple minutes today about is, what do we sort of do about these disparities that we see? So the reason I started studying the second part of it, the how to and the what do we do that Shekinah was sort of referring to, is because when I started presenting a lot of the research that I was finding that based on any sort of perception or stereotype that's out there, that we were seeing these disparities. The solution, the sort of questions that I was getting asked were things about, like, how do we level the playing field? How do we actually inoculate against these sorts of biases and stereotypes? But the solutions were all these system level solutions. Things like let's try and have more equitable hiring practices. Let's try and have algorithms for how we invest in entrepreneurs. Let's try and get more mentors or executives or people at the more investors at the level of, so that we have more representation. And that is all a step in the right direction. This is absolutely things that we need to do. Yet at the same time, what I was hearing from individuals was that these individuals were still really frustrated, that these solutions were all these outside in solutions, that we sort of had to wait around for things to get more fair or more meritocratic or for there to be more representation. And so there was very little from the inside out, that is individuals, that we could be doing to address these perceptions, these signals, these stereotypes, these biases. And so the sort of solutions that were out there were things that people were saying, yes, it's a step in the right direction. And yet we've been talking about these things for a really long time, for years, for decades, around how we have this imperfect system and how there's this myth of meritocracy. And so what I've been studying the last couple of years is how we can, from the inside out, as individuals, even within an imperfect system, be able to have tips and tactics and strategies so that we can actually flip stereotypes and obstacles in our favor, so that we can find and create our own edge. So that even when things may be changing, that we also recognize that the systems may not be changing or be changing too slowly or be changing and creating unintended consequences. And instead, we could take these biases and stereotypes and flip those things in our favor, so that we could still create our own advantage or create our own edge, even within an imperfect system. That we could empower ourselves within an imperfect system to still be able to succeed and see outcomes. So I want to give just a quick example here about what I mean by flipping stereotypes and obstacles in our favor. And I talk lots about this in the book around these different strategies. So I'm so glad that 50 of you will be able to receive a copy of this. But so let me talk a little bit specifically around some of the research that I found in the entrepreneurship context. So what I found is that based on who you are and what you look like, you are more likely to be getting asked one type of question rather than another. So for what I found was that there are two different types of questions that you might receive. And that might be either promotion-oriented questions, questions that are about how big you could take something, or your vision, or the opportunity, or prevention-focused questions. Questions that are about the risks or the drawbacks of something, right? So some people are more likely to get asked promotion-focused questions, things like, tell me about your major milestones, or what's your vision? Whereas other people are more likely to get asked questions around, how are you going to test this? Is this even defensible? And what I find is sort of fascinating in the sense that, again, based on who you are more likely to get asked either promotion or prevention focused question. So women are more likely to get asked prevention focused questions. People of color are more likely to get asked prevention focused questions. All of this sort of typical cast of characters that I mentioned before, based on your gender, your race, your ethnicity, your class, your religion, your sexual orientation, all of those things dictate and lead to you being more likely to get asked prevention-focused questions rather than promotion-focused questions. And what happens is that when you're pitching or you're presenting to investors, if you get asked a prevention-focused question, you are more likely to respond in turn. You are more likely to respond with a prevention orientation, where you stay at the nitty-gritty level and you talk about competitors and break even and how defensible something is. Whereas if you get asked a promotion-focused question, you're more likely to stay at the promotion-oriented level, where you talk about the opportunity and how big something can be and your vision. And so at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, when the investor has to choose who he or she is going to invest in, Of course, they're going to invest in the person who has talked about the opportunity and the vision and how big they could take something. And so these questions are implicitly dictating who gets the funding. But what I find in my research is that when you recognize that you're getting asked a prevention-focused question, you can answer the question, but you do so quickly, and then flip it to a promotion-oriented response. So for example, if you're getting asked about your competitors, you answer by saying, yes, there are a lot of competitors in the market, which include X, Y, and Z, but what our product or service is able to do is all of these other things that allow us to tap into different markets and expand into these other areas. You take that prevention-oriented question, you flip it to a promotion-oriented response, and there I find not only do you gain as much funding as the person who received those promotion-oriented questions, but in fact, you gain more funding than otherwise, and if you were only asked those promotion-oriented questions. And so this is one way that we can guide and redirect and flip things to our advantage. Now, we don't have a lot of time today for me to get into all of the different ways that you can gain and create an edge, but even though the book is entitled Edge, and it's about how to create and find your own edge, the EDGE of EDGE actually stands for the framework that I've developed over the course of the last decade or so of my research, where the E stands for enrich. It is about how do you enrich and show value in any sort of situation that you might be in. The problem is that we don't always have the opportunity to show how we enrich and provide value. So the D stands for delight. It's how do you delight your counterpart? When you're able to delight your counterpart, that's the equivalent of cracking that door open just a little bit so that you have the opportunity to show how you enrich and provide value. The G stands for guide, and that's what we talked a little bit about here, which is even though you know how you enrich and delight, how do you guide and redirect? How do you flip those perceptions in your favor so that you have additional opportunity to show how you enrich and provide value and delight? And the final E stands for effort and hard work. We often think that hard work comes first, that if you put in that hard work, that it'll speak for itself, that it is a meritocracy of sorts, where if you put in that hard work, it'll speak for yourself, for itself. But in fact, effort and hard work come last, because effort and hard work alone are not enough. In fact, when you know how you enrich and delight and guide, that's when your effort and hard work actually work harder for you. And so that is how you actually gain and create an edge in a nutshell. But each of these, the E, D, G, E, are each a section of my book. And we talk about how you actually can turn obstacles, adversity, stereotypes, how you turn that to your advantage so that even within an imperfect myth of meritocracy kind of world, that we have things at our disposal, we can empower ourselves to create that edge for ourselves.
For the next half of this session, we will actually turn it over to some of our alumni to talk about their lived experiences, experiencing bias and racism in the fundraising process. We actually have Elton here with us from JP Morgan to help moderate the session. So I will hand the reins off to you.
Great, thanks, Madison. And I will, let me give a warning early on. They're working in my neighborhood on the internet, and it literally has gone in and out 2 times since we've been on the call. So if I happen to disappear or something, I'm sure Madison will hop in and continue, and I'll try to get back on. But thank you, everybody. My name is Elton McDowell. I co-head at JP Morgan our technology and disruptive commerce business. And that's in the middle market commercial bank. And I know that's a mouthful, but what that really means is we try to help fast-growing consumer tech disruptive companies scale and grow. Because one thing we know is when you are in this type of space, you go from 0 to 100 in like a day and a half, versus in the old world, it used to take, if you think about what happened with Apple went from $1 billion to $2 billion company in a couple of years, right? Where it would take hundreds of years for companies to be $1 billion valuation. That also means that you need different services. And back to like the community aspect, what we try to do is how do we connect our businesses to other founders across the US? How, when we think about JP Morgan, do we take this massive kind of treasure trove of assets and help businesses scale, help them grow, provide that insight? So that's kind of what my team does in my group, and we are across 22 different cities across the US, and we're happy to partner with Mass Challenge for sure, and maybe hopefully democratizing some of that information and give you guys some insight. But enough of me, because I think what's interesting is hearing the conversations from some of our illustrious panel here. So I will let each individual person introduce themselves. I'll do a little bit of an announcement of who's going to speak first. They'll do an intro, and then I'll announce the next person. So maybe with that, Derek, I will turn it over to you just to do a quick intro about yourself and your company.
Hey everyone, Derek Canton. It's great to meet you guys. So excited to be here. I'm a proud 2018 Mass Challenge alum. So whenever I get an opportunity to reconnect with my Mass Challenge family, it's always incredible. So stoked. A little bit about me. My company is called Peripay. We provide integrated contactless payments to merchants. Right now, we're putting a lot of focus on actually helping restaurants open their doors who've been impacted by COVID-19. It's been a crazy journey, and I'm sure we can talk a little bit more about it later. But before joining Mass Challenge, came from the corporate world, Dell EMC. We'll kind of share a little bit more about my experiences in making that transition from being a first-time founder, being a Black founder and whatnot as well too. But really stoked to be here to be able to share my experiences, and I hope anything from my experience is going to add value to you guys as well. So thanks again.
Great. Thanks, Derek. We're looking forward to the conversation. Brandell, maybe just a quick intro on you and your business.
Yes, hi, I'm Brandell Randolph, also a alum from the 2008 cohort from Mass Challenge, and I am the founder CEO of the 1854 Cycling Company. And what we do is we make one of the most technologically advanced bicycles for law enforcement on the market today. And it went 0 to 100 for us. We actually took a working prototype to a trade show, and we actually got too many orders to produce. So now we've been in this thing, but I have a journey I can tell you all about, but I am grateful to share. And I was asked a couple of those prevention questions this morning because I'm in the middle of a lot of things going on, but it's going to be a great conversation. I look forward to sharing with you all.
Thanks, Brandell. It's going to be obviously interesting for a Black man to do law enforcement bikes in this environment. That's going to be an interesting discussion, I will say. That's a thread we're going to press for sure. Elise, great if you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your business.
Yeah, thanks, Alton. So I'm Elise Strobach, CEO and founder of Aeroshield Materials, and we were a Mass Challenge alum in 2019. So working on coming up with better insulation for inside of our windows using a nanoporous form of glass. That was actually developed during my PhD at MIT. So I bring, the female perspective, but also the research perspective, and also grew up in rural Midwest Wisconsin. So bringing a lot of new experiences throughout the journey in the startup world.
Great. We look forward to hearing from you, Elise. Thank you. Our next panelist, Miriam, I would love to introduce yourself and your business. Miriam, there you go.
Off mute. Hi, everybody. My name is Marianne Leitner-Waldman. I am the founder and CEO of Archer Roost Wines. We're building a craft wine brand that's dedicated to bringing transparency and sustainability to the wine industry. And we do that by producing wine in celebrated regions around the world and bringing them to consumers in cans and kegs. Since launching our first product in 2016, we've grown our distribution across 20 states, and we're the official wine partner of JetBlue this winter and throughout this year, which will now go into 2021 because since we're all traveling so much. I think the perspective that I bring to this is that women are very much underrepresented in the alcohol industry. And a huge reason why we went out and started this company was the realization that women are one of the primary drivers of growth. And yet so many of the kind of gatekeepers, decision makers in this industry in particular are men, and how that kind of drives the choices and products that are available to us. And then just thinking as well how we can also lend our story and experiences to being good allies across the board.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you, Miriam. That sounds exciting. And then we'll talk a little bit more about that. And last but not least, Amy.
Great. Hey, everyone. So happy to be here. I'm a two-time Mass Challenge alumni, both the regular and the health tech. So I love this group, love these conversations. I'm the CEO and founder of Pump Spotting, and we are a breastfeeding platform and employer benefits solution that's helping parents feed both their families and their careers, especially right now. In the midst of all that's going on, we connect parents feeding families to one another and to support services through a fusion of community and technology to really reduce barriers around feeding of all forms in the workplace, especially, but anywhere around the world. And I remember, I probably bring various angles to this conversation. I remember my partner, Lindsay, in the middle of our fundraising, I was feeling very frustrated, and she said, "You are a female founder of a breastfeeding technology company from the state of Maine. Did you expect this would be easy?" And so that's what it's been like for me.
No, I can imagine. And again, thank you guys for the introduction. And why don't we just kind of dive in? And one thing the last three founders obviously have in common to some extent is they're both female founders. And I think there's a serious set of challenges, obviously, that female founders have to do. And Elise, I'm going to start with you because I have to think, given the business you are in, and it is very technical, and I'm not convinced there's a ton of women who are sitting in front of VCs saying, "Oh, here's my PhD thesis on something in the industrial space." Give us a little bit about that story and kind of that background and how you navigate it.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting journey. So I actually just finished up my PhD in February, so spinning out of the company full time. But coming into the PhD, I never really considered entrepreneurship or any of these kind of, business activities that I'm doing now as, really a path that was really open to me. And I don't mean that from, it wasn't in the possibilities, but I never thought that this could be a place that I would enjoy and be welcomed the way that I was. But it wasn't like an obvious journey there. Definitely got into the technology, and at the beginning of my master's was really focused on the tech. And I think part of what really helped draw me into the entrepreneurship was, as we started to try and translate this concept of, a new technical breakthrough and say, like, where is the potential? How can we actually have an impact? Started to realize that that's a huge challenge, that doing all this innovative work wasn't going to go anywhere. It wasn't going to be meaningful. And so to start to bring that entrepreneurial bend in was really valuable. It was really meaningful. It really brought a lot of passion. But like, to your point, then it started to become, the questions that we were getting was, how are you manufacturing this? And who are your partners? How are you going to connect with these big industrial, the glass industry, which has been around for a very, very long time. And so it was, I had the great experience of being very gradually transitioned into it and having this realization that this was not only something that was needed, but something that I, as the passionate from the, tech innovation and spending all this time just really researching, even the market, felt that like was uniquely qualified to bring this material to impact. And so a lot of the challenges that you're talking about, we faced them. We had, some of these biased questions. And I can be honest, like, especially in the beginning, I couldn't tell you whether it was because of, my economic background, my gender, or, because I was a PhD and they thought it was, absurd that we would be talking about doing a startup in manufacturing. And I think it's really, those things all got kind of rolled into one. But the way that I would say that myself and brought on a co-founder to help, balance that perspective. And of course, the more people that we got to join the idea, those questions started to turn from, is this possible? Can you do it? To, so what's next? We believe you can figure out the tech challenges. We believe you can make the market, what's the next step in getting there? Yeah.
Well, although, again, you're kind of past the first step of the journey, and you obviously have a much longer journey. If you think about what you know now from what you've experienced, if you go back to that very first kind of meeting with a VC or anything else, would you have done something different to potentially diffuse that, let's say, potential gender bias issue? Is there anything you think you would have done differently?
Yeah, I think that a big thing that I realized was, one, you have to recognize it. I have grown into a position in the company that is also, I realize, very reactive to the climate that is out there. We're very fortunate. I love being in the clean tech space because the people there are just so great to work with. But of course, there's a few bad apples in every bunch, right? But I would say that I spent a lot of time early on questioning what I had done wrong. Why did this person react differently to me? Why did, when I went to facts, when I went to hard science and said, this is where the numbers are, and I understand what these mean, this is a highly technical area. I get people who go, yeah, we believe the numbers, but yeah, we just don't really believe that it can do all these things. And so it was a bit like, I give you facts, I give you all the credibility I can. So yeah, I think a big part was just confidence and saying, sometimes you have to understand yourself and know know where you want to draw the line, know what your expectations are going in.
No, that makes sense. And what I think is interesting is going to be, especially compared to Amy, where Amy's in a business where you would argue people are going to assume you're going to be the expert on what you're dealing with. So subject matter, unlike Elise or even Miriam, you don't really have to say, oh, I think a male knows more than you. So you don't have to deal with that. But what do you have to deal with as a female founder, though? Is it more just, are they taking your ideas seriously? Do they expect you to communicate differently? Would love to have that point of view.
Yeah, I think our topic matter is a really interesting one. And throughout this journey, I've seen so many different shades of how people react to it. I think that breastfeeding, there's so much stigma around breastfeeding in our world generally, that the whole reason we're here and the importance of what we do is that it's not something people like to talk about sometimes, or they come with all these charged emotions. And one of the things that I actually found interesting on our funding journey is that we sometimes would run into bias or have struggles, not just with men or with male genders, but other females who had certain personal experiences with the feeding journey or things that they brought to the table, certain biases about what it was for them or what they need. And sometimes I felt like it was a little bit of a minefield who I was going to be talking to and what this was. And in the beginning, it was really hard and we had to kind of try many different things. And then over time, I think I learned so much from all the reactions that I got to a place, and this sort of goes back to what Laura was saying earlier about how to flip the script on its head, is I got to a place where I got really confident about what I know is not just my personal journey, because sometimes there's also the tendency to go, well, great, you're a mother, you're a breastfeeder, of course you know this, but at one point in our startup, we bought a 40-foot RV and we turned it into a nursing and pumping suite. And I moved on board for 5 months. And so I had personally met over 5,000 women who had been on this journey. And so in my pitch—
you put that on social media? Hopefully you were doing social at the same time?
Yes. Good. We were out and about. But I flipped it on my switch, and right up front in my pitch, I would make a joke. I would use humor and my expertise. And I would say, breastfeeding is really freaking hard. And sometimes there'd be a room of 50 or more men and others. And I'd say, okay, raise your hand if you feel me. And they would all just look at me, but they would laugh. And I would diffuse the situation. And then I would be able to say, here's why I understand this. And here's what we're doing to fix the problem. And so I think for me, it was really owning the realities around this topic and finding my perspective in what we were doing and how we can doing that, and then not shying away from putting it into the conversation in a surprising or diffusing way that allowed me to kind of control it and move forward.
And it's much easier in the current environment of mine to also create the TAM, right? People are now saying breastfeeding is way more important than what it used to be. And I can now give you good data about how big and addressable this market is. And I think whether you're a man who believes in it or not believes in it, you'll believe in the numbers and you believe, okay, wow, this is a massive market. Now, what I think is interesting is I would argue, Elise is in the kind of most male-dominated space with kind of the manufacturing. You're a little bit better in terms of, again, from a female perspective, people can understand it. You gotta have Miriam in the middle here, because I would argue wine feels male-dominated, but then obviously there's a female element to it. So would love to hear kind of your experiences and how you kind of navigated the environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a few things that you have to understand about the wine industry that a lot of people don't realize, which is
Mm-hmm.
that we're operating in a highly regulated space that's called the three-tiered system,
Mm-hmm.
which means that there are the suppliers. So that is the people who own the brands, who are actually making the products. Then there are our distributors, which are essentially these middlemen that by law you have to sell through. A lot of them are billion-dollar privately owned family businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the retailers. So that's bars, restaurants, and retailers. And then there's the end consumer. So yes, I think that everybody thinks of wine industry as like women at book club or, out with their girlfriends drinking wine. But what they don't realize is all of the different steps and barriers or doors that you have to walk through in order to bring that product to market. And who are those doors? And the interesting thing about this, you're talking about TAM, we're a $60 billion market just here in the United States.
Yep.
It's, 100, I mean, it's 200 billion, like globally, like on the low side. And increasingly you have that market is growing at a huge rate.
Yep.
But what's interesting about the way that market has been built and serviced is it's actually been built to service less than 1% of consumers, which happen to be collectors who are overwhelmingly white male and middle-aged plus. And the kind of people who are driving and deciding what's good and actually starts, all the way in the vineyard with the winemaker who, statistically speaking, is male. I mean, more than 90% of winemakers that are out there operating are male. Distributorships are overwhelmingly owned and operated by men, and the same with retail. So ultimately, then you have also the wine media and what we call the institutional palate. That's James Suckling, right? Robert Parker. They're the ones that kind of went out and decided this is what wine is good, this is what wine is bad. And what they've ended up doing is creating a market that is actually highly disconnected from its core consumer. They don't connect with, what are the instances that people are drinking wine. They're entirely engineered towards special occasions and certain type of styles that are not necessarily, that don't necessarily resonate with the core consumer. So just as an example, when we, first started producing wine, I'm not from a family that owns a vineyard. I'm not part of that traditional institution or kind of a circle. And so it was extremely hard to kind of break into that. But it was also really hard convincing people that the profile and who they should think about as the modern wine drinker and who's actually spending money around wine has changed. And that what that consumer actually is looking for is different than past consumers. And it's the same consumer who is shopping organic, who is looking for clean label products, that is increasingly informed about the products that she's buying for her body, like for her family and putting into her body. And yet the wine industry has been engineered to obfuscate, to not be connected to the story, and instead be over-reliant on a consumer that has a ton of time to research different labels and to understand different wine regions, when really there's so much potential in saying, I'm going to build a brand that is gluten-free, because what most people don't realize is that there are 70 different additives that get added to wines, including bad animal byproducts that aren't even disclosed on the label, that will help provide keys through our 4 Ps, practice, people, place, and profile, so that we can answer all these questions for you and make decisions easier. And so no matter where you are, you can see our logo, which is a highly memorable woman riding a moose, and you kind of know who we stand for, and know that we've thought about you in developing our product and bringing it to market.
Wow, that's actually really interesting. It may be interesting if you and Amy got together and come up with a wine listing for women who want to breastfeed but actually enjoy a really nice wine that actually helps the kid as well. I don't know.
Well, let me tell you something. As a breastfeeding mom, I will say, Amy, I definitely want to connect with you. And the other thing too is that a huge part about our product has actually been about leaving the traditional bottle behind and embracing formats that fit our consumers' lifestyle so that we can bring that just a glass of wine, which depending on the stage of your life that you're in, that might be all that you want, but you're also keeping it together, particularly in the age of homeschooling because of COVID, that all you really want is that glass of wine at the end of the day.
No, that's a good point. And I think you guys may have something going on there. I want to switch topics a little bit. I actually want to talk to Brandel and Derek, especially the same way as we were talking about female founders and some of those specific challenges. The challenges of being a Black male founder in this kind of market, in this world, is definitely different and evolving. And I'll start with Brandel. Just maybe talk a little bit about, obviously, what are the challenges of being a Black male founder?
It's pretty difficult for me because there's always one more thing. There's always some other hurdle that you have to prove. There's always something else that you miss. It's like you're always in front of someone who's trying to match wits with you. Mm-hmm. Do you know enough about this screwdriver that does this and this? And so you can be as prepared as possible. But over the last year and a half or so, it's been pretty much a challenging process. Yeah. But I can say in this climate that we're in, there's an expectation of Black males to which we aren't as sophisticated in business as people might assume. Mm-hmm. So no matter which of my credentials I throw on the table, from my Wharton degree or my background in trading or whatever, nothing's ever sufficient enough. But to walk away and see someone who's mediocre, at best, get funding is pretty disheartening. But I can go on and on. But yeah.
Yeah, I think it was like the comment that the professor made earlier. It's, what does the friends and family round really kind of signify, right? It signifies, because I know from my own personal perspective, if I go and do a friends and family round, I'm going to come up with maybe $0 and 0 cents. Like, I mean, they're not going to be coming from an economic perspective where they're going to say, here's $500,000 to, start your idea. So I can understand that. Derek, what about you from your perspective, your experience?
Yeah, Alton. So I'm glad that you kind of brought up that whole friends and family. So just for some perspective, so we closed a seed round of financing, earlier this year, and like many Black founders, like, friends and family wasn't an option for me, right? And kind of my background in growing up, and it's interesting. I had this conversation with my dad when I first started the business, where he's like, no one told me I could start a business, right? And my dad's like, I wish that was an option. I wish I had that perspective. And so I think part of it, the challenges for me was like, where do I even start, right? Like, who can I turn to? Who can I talk to? And, Mass Challenge was really my jumping point, that I was like, all right, well, if I get into Mass Challenge, like, I'm all in, right? We're going to figure this out. And that was kind of a catalyst for me. And I was fortunate enough to get connected with Brandel and some other incredible, Black mentors. And when it came for the time for us to start raising money, people said, it's going to take, 3 months or so to raise capital, right? And so I'm like, cool. Well, if it takes them 3 months, I'm going to plan for at least 8 months to start the process.
Yeah, I was going to say, right? Double or triple it.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, and a lot of it was just like, okay, who can I turn to? Who can I start talking to about this process? What are the metrics we need to show? What's the story that we need to tell? And I almost, I was talking to one of my mentors, and one of the things he told me was, don't fall into the trap of go fetch a rock. And a lot of times what I saw was, there were times I would meet with investors and be like, okay, cool. But like, what about this? And can you continue to de-risk that? And can you go and hit that metric? And one of the challenges I actually got into was this whole process of like, okay, well, what's the next benchmark? And is this going to be good enough for me to raise capital? And then what's the proof points I need to show that's like, okay, well, he's doing it and now he can get there. And there's a point where he actually sat me down and told me, he said, look, Dirk, you need to get into the perspective of, you're not going and just looking for money. You're actually building a business and creating opportunities for people to be able to invest and giving them a chance to be able to be part of that journey, right? And so for me, as soon as I changed that mindset, and it kind of goes a little bit to that, that promotion, perspective of instead of me being like, yeah, like, yes, it's a competitive market. And yeah, there's some things here, but it's like, hey, look, this is how we're doing things differently. And this is how we're going to continue to win. And either on board or you're not, but the train's leaving the station.
Right.
And one thing that I noticed is as soon as I changed that mentality and I was like, hey, look, like, I don't need you, right? This is an opportunity for you. Our round was halfway raised in like a week just off that perspective. And I literally had to have someone sit down and just tell me, like, it's okay for you to have this perspective and not be in the, oh, woe is me, I'm a Black founder, but like take advantage and step forward. And so that was a very challenging mentality. And so now one of the things that we're thinking about now is to accelerate it. We're thinking about a seed round. Now we're having some early conversations with some VCs and whatnot. Now it's a different ballgame, right? And looking for a lead investor. And one of the challenges that we're going through now, it's like, okay, well, like, candidly, almost all the investors that we have don't look anything like me, right? And so now it's like, well, who do we talk to? And fortunate enough now to have someone who we recently brought on board who's kind of helping us through this process. But there's a lot of ups and downs. And I think one of the big things I always struggle with initially too is I would meet with people and they would say, very encouraging things like, hey, this deck looks great, or hey, this is really cool metrics. And I always got this feeling of, is it good because I'm a Black young founder? Or is it good because I'm an entrepreneur that's doing really cool stuff? Right. And I struggled often to determine what's that pendulum, right? Are you more on the side of like, hey, like, cool, like you're doing great, versus, hey, this is a really, really cool, viable opportunity. And so being able to understand what perspective that person has, and being able to look at it from that lens has allowed me to, when I'm having these meetings, to see, okay, well, how should I address this conversation? And what are the things I should talk about to understand where are their biases coming from? And what are they thinking? Is this just like a, hey, I want to help out this Black founder? Or is it hey, this guy is doing some really cool stuff as a business?
Yeah. No, and that's such an interesting point, because I'm actually more hopeful that the world is getting a little bit better in terms of, I know in our space, and we're talking to a lot of VCs, and even as JP Morgan, what we're focused on is how do you help, again, women, minority-owned founders, giving them that, like you were saying, almost like that ability to go in and say, this is actually a good idea. And this is not a good idea just because I'm Black. This is a good idea for anybody, right? So I'm hoping the world is going to be a little bit better. I feel like there's a positive movement, even in the VC community, to say I want to focus on female-owned founders of color, and so hopefully I'm not over optimistic, but maybe things will definitely get a little bit better from that perspective. I guess one other question in terms of as two Black male founders. Again, you're going for your Derek on your seed. Brandel, you've seen a lot of growth, raised a lot of money. What do you wish you would have done differently, kind of, that first conversation, those first discussions? Would you have presented the ideas differently? Would you have said, I need to take more money sooner or less money? What is some of that mindset? Maybe Brandel, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I would have started by asking for a lot more money. Mm-hmm. Because one of the things about manufacturing and product development is that people understand how much these things cost. And when you ask for lots of money, they take you a lot more seriously. So it is the weirdest dynamic that I wish I had known early on. Like my friends and family and my seed round, my runway was great. And I thought I did well, but then I turned out and I started doing the numbers on how much I actually need to bring the number of units I need into the market, and then later go to the consumer phase. And I was not asking for enough. And I wish I had did it in that way so that people understood that I had done all the research about my business. And that's one thing I would love to have step back and have the confidence to ask for what you need. Yeah. Up front, and actually focus on and know exactly what you need for that 18 to 24 months.
Right.
Yeah, man, I would echo that 100% would echo that. I mean, this is literally something that we're going through right now. And I think part of it is when you're talking to investors and you say, you're looking for whatever that number may be, depending on that number, they automatically put you in a bucket, right? And, depending on the space that you're in, of course, as well too, right? If you're doing something in healthcare or, we're in the fintech space. So, we have to deal with a lot of compliance and there's a lot of things that we have to deal and like make sure we know our stuff. And so if I came out the gate and I gave a number and and they were like, okay, well, clearly he doesn't know what he's talking about because it's way too low. And so I think part of it is more important than the number. It's the story that you're telling. And so as we know, we're starting to have some conversation now early. I think there's a couple, really core things that I've learned. I think one is you're never really raising money until you have your first commitment or, check in the bank, right? And that story around it, right? You're always looking for feedback on your presentation. I'm always looking for insight on our momentum. I'm like, oh, can you give me some feedback on our traction and our growth rates, right? And and then you tell the story of like, hey, well, this is what we're doing and this is our trajectory. But get them excited about the opportunity, right? Like, well, we're killing it right now, but man, if we really put some gasoline on this fire here, like, this is what we could do, right? And then you open up the door for them to say, well, what are you thinking? I'm like, I'm glad you asked, right? And that's when you can really lay into that, right? And then you can talk about the plan. And I think, one of the biggest things that, beyond just how are you going to spend the money, it's like, where are you going, right? And what are you going to get accomplished? Because at the end of the day, like if you told someone, hey, for every dollar you give me, I'll give you $10 back, they'll write you $1 billion check, right? And it's not necessarily about the input, but it's about the measurable output. And so for me, with this kind of, as we're focusing on our growth now, it's really focusing on, okay, well, here's our measurable outputs, right? And this is exactly what we're doing. And this is how we're going to further that. And now, so coming out as a position, again, as a little bit before, a position of confidence, opposed to the, hey, man, we need money to survive, right? Now it's hey, we're really growing, and this is an opportunity for you to be a part of it.
Yeah. No, that's actually interesting. And I'll tell you from the financial perspective, I know, at least on a JP Morgan side, most investors I talk to, everybody is very focused on growth, but growth at a responsible price. Something like a GARP, growth at a reasonable price. I've found that many investors now are much less excited about throwing a ton of money at an idea. And yes, it grows because you're spending gobs of money on marketing, but as soon as it goes away, oh, guess what? Your sales fall to, zero. So people definitely want to see you have a business model that is sustainable. And I will tell you, on the consumer side, a lot of business I covered, if you have been a digitally native business, this has been, for most of those companies, some of the best periods ever. Because some of the major competitors who are brick and mortar are having the hardest time because guess what? Stores are closed. They never reach their consumer in a very unique, and I would argue kind of differentiated voice. And those are the businesses that are struggling. But businesses that are like, again, digitally native, had a voice, connected with their consumers, it's amazing what they've done. When you look at CAC has gone down, LTVs have gone up. So there are definitely opportunities in the disruption. So it's kind of exciting for everyone. One comment, and I'm going to kind of go around the horn here with our founders. Black Lives Matter is a big thing, right? And it's on kind of every aspect of when you turn the news on. Some of you guys have obviously employees that you're dealing with. You're in markets that are really interesting because, again, if I'm Brandel and I'm selling bikes to law enforcement, how does the consumer view that? So maybe I'll start, and I'm going to go a little bit of an enter-out kind of perspective is, Miriam, especially in the wine space, how are you finding that your consumers and people or your employees are even asking about, what is the position of the company? How should we be thinking about it?
That's a really great question. And I think I sort of think about it in multiple different levels. The first is, how do you act from a place of authenticity? Which is that I want to personally come from a place of like true allyship and understand that there are token gestures and that there's a rush right now to make token gestures. And to be perceived that you're saying the right thing or you're doing the right thing, but there isn't a ton of accountability around whether or not you're really following through. And like, not to go off track, but like one of the things that really bothers me is it's like, sometimes I think that Black Lives Matter movement has been so much about police reform, Yet now we're talking about renaming streets and army bases. And it's like, that's a great token gesture, but we have to really make sure that we're reforming, that we're doing real police reform.
Mm-hmm.
And in wine, one of the things that I've talked a lot with and connected with a lot of other leaders in the wine space about is, Black people drink wine. Black people drink a lot of wine. And by the way, like they're if you look at the way that the alcohol industry has marketed to Black people historically, it's pejorative and it's out of step with reality. And
we're drinking a lot of wine these days, I promise.
Yeah, and there's all of these like stories coming out of the NBA, like how they're getting like shipments and shipments of wine from Bordeaux and Burgundy, and to me, and I say this in a way that like it has really forced me to take a step back and saying, are we creating inclusive spaces? And one of our core values as a business has been, how do we create content that resonates emotionally with our consumers?
Mm-hmm.
And making sure that like they feel that they can actually see them, so that we are creating a space where they feel comfortable. And so that has meant taking a really hard look at, our marketing, the events that we show up at, and really making sure that we are part of this larger conversation. The other piece too is that the alcohol industry, from a sales perspective, has generally all looked the same. So how do we make sure that like we're going out and we're recruiting new and diverse voices into the space, and we're bringing in their perspective? Because that's super important in helping us to achieve our goal. And then lastly, it's also like we've done a really hard look at like who is our marketing, who's our executive team. We have positions that are open, making sure that like we're expanding our networks to really recruit diverse talent, and doing that at the board level. But to me, it's like so much of it comes down to like, it's really easy to post on social media, but like we need to create a culture of accountability, and we need to create a culture of inclusivity, and we really need to live and breathe what we say. And by the way, like, I'm not just saying this because I want my son to grow up in a more equitable world, and I believe that we should live in a meritocracy, and that's foundational to our democracy. I'm also saying that as a businesswoman, because why would I be so stupid as to like limit my potential pool of consumers?
Yeah, absolutely. No, very good point. Following on that, and pool of consumers, and Brandel, how are you navigating BLM in market where you are selling bikes to law enforcement?
So I just posted a link in the chat. What happened was that when Trek and Specialized had all the controversy of people using bikes as weapons, the biggest industry trade magazine in the world sought me out to see how like the biggest or the only Black manufacturer of police bikes was actually dealing with this. And the interesting thing is that when they looked at the technology that we're doing and how we're doing this bike, it was basically created for more of a community-based response for police officers. And when the article came out and people heard about me, the interest in my bike actually grew. And the article came out in July, and we probably got more contacts from police departments across the country than, but we've had a lot of discussion. Budgets are now just being formalized and cemented for 2021. So we're now closing a lot of deals. So that's one perspective. But on the other perspective, when I do pitch it to police officers, I come straight out of the thing and I kind of shoot the elephant in the room.
Right.
Because, not to put a damper on things, my brother was killed by the Los Angeles Police Department in 2005. So when I talk about what I'm doing to impact the world, I actually want a more community-oriented, situation here. And I believe bikes get police officers closer to the community because you're not in this armored vehicle going through the communities. But these bikes also allow an officer to have access to health services, mental health services, and things of that nature. But in context of all that were happening, I now provide a value to all the police departments. Not only can you get it closer to the community, but you can also find a way to find a better relationship with the community by buying from this particular company instead of that particular company. And I use that and I add a premium. So it's kind of like that 0 to 100 thing that we talked about, but it's been going great so far. It hasn't, but one of the things about it is that as a Black founder, my existence through all this stuff is kind of like my protest. Right. You know, how I choose to protest. So I want to make my life matters statement, because what I want to do is grow and let that growth be something that benefits communities, you know, in a different way. So this is my solution to police brutality.
Oh, that's interesting. And I also want to be mindful of time, because I think we're almost over. So I'm going to I want to end on a couple of things, and we're going to do a little bit of a round robin. And I think, can you give the audience here, and we'll start with Elise, one bit of advice about how to think about, you know, being a founder as a woman in kind of the current thing, just maybe a bit of advice of what to think about. And I'm going to ask all of our panelists that. Brandel and Derek, I'm going to ask from a male perspective, obviously not a woman perspective, but go ahead, Elise.
Yeah, so I think the biggest piece of advice is, you know, there's this concept of imposter syndrome. And there's this idea that, like, I don't see people that look like me, that think like me. And I wasted a lot of time thinking that way. Instead, I think what we've been trying to work towards is instead saying, do you have a different way of thinking? Do you have a different approach? Let's celebrate it. Like, that's where the power, you know, especially with our company coming into an industry that is very old, very established, very built on decades of relationships. Yeah, you know, there's a lot of power in diversity, and there's a lot of power in going through adversity and sharing either what you've brought out of that or the lessons that you've learned from it.
No, that's a very good point. I love that comment. Derek, on you, what do you think a good piece of advice?
Yeah, so I think on my side, I think the number one thing I'd say is stay true to who you are. And what I mean by that is that, you know, I remember when I first started my business, I would often play the comparison game and be like, well, I don't have this, I don't have that, you know, I don't look like that, and, you know, I don't have this degree or whatever. And just because my journey looked different than someone else's, I'd automatically say, well, I can't get to where they're going. And I think that the path that I've been on and, you know, the seasons I've gone through has actually better prepared me and better equipped me for the further things that are coming in my journey. And so instead of being able to look at the challenges and the obstacles and say, well, this stinks, right? But more just having an attitude of, all right, you know what? Well, we're going to figure it out. It's going to make me stronger. It's going to make my business stronger. And, like, we're not quitting. And so I think that's really the number one thing I'll leave you guys with is don't count your background or your experiences as less, because a lot of the times those are your competitive edge that no one can replicate.
No, I like that. Very good point. Amy, what about you?
I'd say build a personal power community. When I went through fundraising, I had a couple other female founders. I had one person who'd been really successful in fundraising, and they were my people throughout this journey. When I got a question that I needed to flip on its head, or I needed to practice how I'd say something differently, or I was really frustrated, or just the imposter syndrome, I got to a point where I felt like I can't do this anymore. I'm so beat up. My mental load. There were 3 specific people in a little pod that I would call, and they had the perfect cheer up. They had the perfect advice. And it just made them the go-to people to help me get through this. And I was really glad that I had sort of asked them ahead of time to play this role and help me through it.
That's a very good point. Brandel, what about you? Any stage in words for?
Yes, my advice is, it's kind of like, you will find the people who are right for you. Don't worry about who says no, because sometimes that no actually saves you from a lot of headache down the line. So finding that investor that's right for you is more important than just finding anybody, because you really want to make sure you have the relationship with that person that can grow towards everything else you need. because it's a hard lesson, but yes, some of the no's do save you.
Yeah, good point. And Miriam, last but not least.
I would say take that chip on your shoulder and turn it into a crowbar. It's really easy when you when the deck is stacked against you to like get really frustrated and to let that chip on your shoulder grow. And instead, we're living in a really interesting zeitgeist moment where we're having these frank conversations. So use that chip as a crowbar. Go out and demand those conversations now that people haven't wanted to give you. Own your story and your differences, and don't let anybody shut any doors in your face. Like, pry that door open.
Very good point. And for me, the last point for everybody here, I think, one, always remember you are the best product. If you think about everybody who has money, they're trying to give you money at some point, because you are the people who are going to have the next $100 million business, the next $1 billion business. And what business realizes now is, I need to make connections with all of you guys sooner, faster, quicker, be a more powerful ally. When I think about my business, what's most important is if I can help, Brandel look around the corner to grow his business to be the first, again, $1 billion business, he will always remember me from when he was a $1 million business, right? All business understands that now. And we know we need to have, I don't care how small you are, if you're pre-revenue, there is so much value in knowing you. That is a very powerful thing that I will say 5 years ago, people would have never thought of. Nobody, you'll have big businesses trying to kowtow and let me meet all these great founders. VC's the same way. So the good thing is you are the most important product in the innovation economy because you guys are innovators, and that's exciting. With that, I will turn it back to Madison.
Thank you so much, everyone. And just wow. Thank you for sharing your stories. Thank you for sharing your advice. I know we all appreciate hearing about these real, actual experiences that you all have had, and that I'm sure many of the current cohort of founders are about to experience or experiencing currently. And I touched on it in the beginning when we were first starting the session, but this is not enough time to discuss everything. 90 minutes will never be enough time to cover this topic to the extent that we need to. So we hope that this is a starting point for everyone to go off and continue to have these conversations. You can always come and talk to Mass Challenge, talk to other founders, talk to leaders, talk to your mentors, experts, anyone about this. We hope that this helps open some doors for you.
Talk to your banks.
Yes. Absolutely. So thank you again for everyone. And I know we are over time, so I will just let everyone go now. Thank you again, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks,
have a great evening.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.